This week, in our main topic here on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to talk about draw steel at level 1. Early on Saturday morning, really early on Saturday morning for One Teos Abadia, we played the introductory adventure called The Road to Broadhurst as part of Tom Christie's D20 Play channel. Joining us were DM David, Will from This Effing DM, and joining us from the Southern Hemisphere was Mauricio. And we all played in this 3.5 hour game, give or take. So Teos, I did that, and we want to sort of begin our look at the final version of Draw Steel, much like we did with Shadow Dark, much like we did with Daggerheart, much like we did with some other games over the years. We're going to give it a glance. Now, let me take a big drink before I read this disclaimer. Okay, Draw Steel fans, ready? We like this game. We do. We're trying to figure out how much we like it. If we love it, if it's good. So any critical analysis you might hear that's not glowing and completely positive does not mean we hate the game, does not mean we wish ill on the designers. James Introcaso, I love him like a brother. We don't want to stir up drama just for clicks or views. We actually want to discuss this as its own separate entity of a TTRPG. We were both part of earlier playtests. I think both of our names appear in the credits of the books as designers. So we did not create large parts of this game. We are not the main design team, but we did some design work on the monsters, the player rules, the adventure, the Delian Tomb. We are not being paid to review this. I think I received a contributor copy.
Yep. Me too.
I assume Teos did as well.
Yep.
So everything we say is based on one, limited play, our own opinions and preferences for role-playing games, and then our long and storied and sometimes hectic experiences, game designers, players, and game masters on many, many, many other games. Teos, take it away. I've spoken long enough.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. So yeah, we love Draw Steel. We look forward to drawing more steel. And what we want to do is think about this, right? Because as designers, when we experience a game, we can't help but start analyzing it and thinking about it and its potential, the parts where maybe it could do something differently and maybe should, which is our opinion based on many, many games that we play, right? We cannot help but do that. And we hope that you enjoy the ride as many have in the past when we analyze a game. Here, we're just getting started. We're just getting warmed up. So you get to join us on this introduction on our Draw Steel voyage, which was centered around that game of Road to Broadhurst. Really neat intro adventure. We are going to spoil some aspects of it. So if you're going to play this in the near future, you probably want to wait and listen to this later. If you're going to run it, on the other hand, this will be helpful to you. And there are a lot of neat things that we're going to talk about, not just the game itself, Draw Steel, not just the adventure, but the larger goals that MCDM has for Draw Steel, which I found fascinating because a lot of games, they don't necessarily have goals other than like sell the game that I love. But there are specific goals, things the game is trying to do, and we'll jump right into it, which is what the game is aiming to do with what they call tactical, heroic, cinematic fantasy. And if you read the book, the very beginning of the book jumps into all 4 of these keywords and why they went with them and how this game aims to be these things and not what other games are, right? It doesn't focus on dungeon crawling. It's not about encumbrance and whether your food or arrows or torches run out. And in the game itself, they say, if you like that kind of thing, you should go play Shadow Dark. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting way of writing to you, right? And saying our games are this, not these other things, right? We're not about hex crawling. We're not about this and the other. Go play these other games if those kinds of things sound more fun.
Mm-hmm. And those 4 words, carry a lot of weight in terms of role-playing games, in terms of genres, in terms of entertainment. And I'm going to knock the last one off first. So, fantasy.
Yeah.
This is clearly a heroic
Hmm.
fantasy genre game, right? There are swords and spells. Uh, Spoiler: elves guarding their forest. Uh, Sick goats, right? Lots of things that draw to mind the fantasy genre. I will say though that it's not um, as Teo said, it's not as writ detail oriented in terms of those sorts of things. Because as I was reading the word swords, I realized I don't know what weapon my character was using. Right? It said uh I could use these weapons, these medium weapons like swords, maces, and axes, but this pre-generated character I used didn't say you are wielding this sword. I just did damage with my attacks.
Yeah, and I assume knowing, I mean, you're playing a troubadour, it was probably like your musical instrument, even maybe. But yeah, you're probably right that it doesn't necessarily say. And maybe the idea is that it's for you to define.
Right. Well, that's the thing. This is a pre-generated character of a learn to play packet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if as we actually build a character from scratch, if that is part of the process of building the character is to choose a weapon that you have. But it didn't give me on my character sheet equipment that I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely the game is not super about equipment, but it's interesting. Yeah. The pregen
Mhm.
does not list equipment, which maybe further underscores that. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that wasn't a complaint. That was an
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
tidbit about that.
Hmm.
So the game, we've got the fantasy down. So let's talk about tactical, heroic, and cinematic. Uh, Tactical. I think we can safely say this is a tactical game.
Yeah.
Uh, there was a lot of where are you standing? How close are you to this thing? Are you pushing, sliding, or pulling? Well, you can't push here because that doesn't take the creature further away from you.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm 6 squares away from you instead of 5, so you can't gain the benefit of this effect I have. And the game itself tells you it must be played on a grid.
Yeah.
Uh, and during play, we saw that it would be very, very difficult not to play on a grid.
Yeah, and I'll say I ran fourth edition a lot of times, Theater of the Mind. You know,
Mhm.
I could see that you could with this game, but you'd have to make a lot of judgment calls and be in a group that's very happy with just saying like, yeah, on average, probably this many are in range. But the fun of it is meant to be played on a grid. You are meant to think
Yep.
about these sort of things, and the tactics isn't just around the grid, but also your characters, right? Your characters have a
Mhm.
heroic resource. So, do I spend it early in the game for a quick, powerful thing, or do I let that heroic resource build up round over round so that later in combat, I have the ability to use this very expensive power that might cost multiple rounds worth of points, but deals a big effect. That kind of tactics of which resources you use when those are important, or even we'll get into some of the tactics of my character, which I found fascinating, but it's
Mhm.
not just about the grid positioning, it's about how you use your capabilities and when. Those are neat choices.
Mhm. The next word I want to tackle is heroic. Because we were definitely heroes, even at first level. You did not feel like the dirt farmer who just happened to pick up a pitchfork and is now out on the road,
Right. Yeah.
fighting monsters. You come with a lot of dynamite with which to blow things sky high.
Yeah, I mean, your character was pushing monsters around. It's worth, folks, if you want to go check out that video of this game. We'll put a link in the show notes. Because it's just amazing how you were just ping ponging these characters, these enemies against each other to murderize them. That was impressive. And there are very few role playing games that would allow you to have this kind of impact on enemies as a level one character, right? That would be the kind of thing that you'd have to be high level to do, right? This sort of mass telekinesis type, mass sliding
Yep.
and moving. Very few games give you that at a low level, and this is
Mhm.
baked into the game from the beginning.
Yep. So did your character then feel heroic? I know we're going to talk about our characters
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah. Yes, it did. I felt like I was, I was not some fledgling scion. I felt like a scion that was, up there with any movie where I'm doing neat effects from the beginning and I'm shooting mind bullets out at people and having powerful effects. Now, those things are scaled with the level of damage that we're doing, to take out goblins, but
Yep.
they felt heroic and real and powerful.
And finally, cinematic. This is the one that always throws me. I try to wrap my mind
Mhm.
around the word cinematic and what that actually means, both in just general plain lay terms and then in terms of a role playing game. So what did you take away from this particular
Yeah.
game in terms of cinematic?
So we were stopping waves of rat folk from reaching a caravan in one of the encounters, and I definitely was picturing what it must be to have, you rush to take the ones that are coming from the north, and suddenly a group comes from the east and then from the south, and in another fight, goblins lit oil on fire to block our path. Right. To me, what this cinematic type of play is doing is it feels like you're playing in a movie with a special effects budget, right? Where you're the way the game is set up, what monsters can do, what the encounter is set up to do, feels like it's spending an effects budget, right?
Mhm.
And your enemies do big cinematic stunts, and they come with that. I think Daggerheart has some of this too, right? Those special powers that they're doing, you can imagine that in a movie you would have to work with the special effects director to make sure it's captured correctly because it's so visual and interesting what a monster is doing. Whereas in 5th edition, some monsters, as cool as they might be thematically, are a little boring, especially in 2014. I think 2024 tried to be a little more interesting with some of those monsters, giving them a little more flavor, especially if you look at the giants and how they changed, right? But
Mhm.
whereas 2014 to 2024 might have said, hey, let's add a little cold damage to that Frost Giant's axe, and maybe let's push the foe back a square. What Draw Steel is doing is saying, I'm going to shove you back 6 squares and knock you prone, and I'm going to stomp my foot, and the ground will shake around me. Right? It's that
Mhm.
kind of that's the cinematic piece of it that's so significant. And encounter wise, the surface might be all ice so that everybody slides extra, or whatever, something like that. There's a raging snowstorm, and here's what it does. Right? Those kinds of effects that try to make everything very cinematic.
Awesome. So let's move on to we're going to talk about our characters, Teos. We're going to talk about our
Woo!
characters as level one. So, as a reminder for those who didn't listen to us when we were playtesting or don't know, on your turn, characters can do three things. They have a main action, they have a maneuver, and then they have a move action. And there are certain maneuvers, certain other actions that anyone can take, but then there are some that are very specific to your character. So, Teos, what were some of the things about your character that were noteworthy? And then what were those actions, maneuvers, and moves for you?
Yeah, sure. So I played a talent, which is a psionicist, and FNGM will played a null, which is more of a psi warrior. So two flavors, but different. So I am not, going up and cutting you. I'm touching my brain and sending a wave of pain your way. And a lot of what I did was ranged with telepathy, telekinesis type of attacks. A neat thing I had, which is an additional type of action you didn't mention, is a triggered action. And I had a field of energy called Repulsive Ward, where whenever an adjacent creature dealt damage to me, I could push them back 2 squares. And that was kind of cool and it's what's called a free trigger. So I can do it endless number of times. And like D&D where you use your reaction and you're done, when it's a free trigger, you can do it any number of times. And so that was cool and tactical because I could literally shove an enemy away and then shove another enemy into that enemy and possibly kill them if they're a minion. But also I could shove them into a wall or just position them into a place where it might be helpful when my turn started. So there was tactics even in that, and I thought that was that's the kind of little off-turn power that I find as being a lot of fun. I had a number of powers that do some sort of version of at a range, you deal damage to somebody. I had a kinetic pulse. And then a lot of these, it's important to say that the way that Draw Steel works, which is kind of neat, is they don't believe in attacking and missing, which boy could my Deadlands game use this, where as we've elevated in level, we do a lot of missing. The monsters miss, we miss, and then finally someone lands a blow and it's really decisive. Here, Draw Steel says, we don't want that. We want this heroic play to be happening constantly. So you make a power roll, which would be like an attack roll in D&D. And you have 3 possible tiers of effect. So even on what we might call a miss, rolling with a result less than 11, you have something. So if I do a kinetic pulse, 2 psychic damage. But if I get 12 to 16 for the second tier of effect, 5 psychic damage, and I push the target 1. If I get 17 or higher, I get 7 psychic damage and I push them 2, right? So this is kind of cool. And this is in a burst, this kinetic pulse. So it's everybody adjacent to me. I can just shove them back, right? Very cinematic feel, right out of, some movie where, you can imagine Magneto shoving, cops back or things like that. And then that tiering effect is nice because what it allows powers to do is to create different things, like the equivalent of a saving throw, where you compare, and you don't actually roll for save, but you compare the number in your power to their ability score. So for example, when I do Awe, it's a ranged attack, and if I got a tier 2 result, I do 8 psychic damage, and if their score is less than 1, then they are frightened, save ends. If I got a tier 3, then it's if their score is less than 2, they are frightened, save ends. So there's kind of that neat tiering of effects that allow you to do stuff. So I had a lot of these kinds of neat powers that were sort of ranged and a rider, like frightening them or pushing them. I had a thing that slid people a large number of squares, which could be very tactical, but did no damage. And the ability that I used several times that was it was my most expensive ability, was called Flashback. It cost me 5 of my heroic resource called Clarity. Every class has a heroic resource. It builds every round. Sometimes it builds under other situations. So 5 points means there's no way I'm casting it the first round, but possibly if I got really lucky, I might be able to do it in level 2 or round 2. Flashback lets me or another target of my or ally of my choice immediately use a heroic heroic ability that has a heroic resource cost of 7 or lower, which 7 is pretty darn expensive. And you do it immediately without spending that cost. And I use this on your character because you had just done like a really neat thing that you would not be able to do for a few rounds. And I used Flashback and you got to do it immediately, right? Which is kind of cool. And it's that kind of tactical teamwork. The last thing I'll say is my character, on top of all these neat things, has a special thing that not all classes have, which is that I can go into negatives on my heroic resource. And this is a really neat way to think of a psionicist in movies where, they've done stuff and everybody says, don't push yourself harder, right? And you go, no, and then like blood comes out your nose, right? This is built into my class where I can go into negative of my heroic resource called Clarity. So I can go into negative Clarity and borrow from my Clarity pool. And this is what's called being strained. And a number of my powers have a strained little effect where if I'm in strain, if I'm in negatives, they might be more powerful. Right? I might be able to send someone flying into the air, or it's a burst 2 instead of a burst 1, things like that. And that was really neat. It was very, I wanted to be in strain, but strain causes me damage. Some of the powers actually damage me more or cause me to start bleeding or any number of things. So it was a really neat tactical decision around whether to be strained and how to do that. And I did sometimes just like, for example, I went strained just to use Flashback because Flashback's so cool. And that's fun. But I was often right on the edge of dying and my team members kept me on my feet, which was very neat.
I was on the edge of dying too, but I'll get into that in a second. My character, not me.
Yeah.
So I was playing the Troubadour, which is sort of the equivalent of what we would think of as the Bard.
Yeah.
I had a swashbuckler kit that let me use light armor and medium weapons like swords, maces, or axes, although I wasn't sure how that actually affected anything. Again,
Yeah,
Pre-gen
it's made into
character.
the
So
pre-gen. Yeah, but kits
right,
kits are a thing, and you can swap kits, which is kind of neat. So yeah,
right,
presumably there's something going on that was in your character sheet. Yeah.
yeah. My heroic resource was called drama. So most characters they will get one heroic resource per victory that you have. And how that works is you finish an encounter that is dangerous or hard or dramatic, I will say, you gain a victory. So if you go through 3 combats without resting, you have 3 victories. So when you start the next combat, you start with 3 of your heroic resource. So I start
Which
with
encourages you to keep going, right? Is the
to keep
don't
going,
take a
right?
rest, keep going because this is going to be make you more awesome, not less. Yeah.
Exactly. So you gain however many heroic resources per victory that you have. Then I got to roll 1d3 at the start of each of my turns to gain that many more drama. Plus, I gain drama in the following situations. If 3 or more heroes used abilities on the same turn, I gained 2. And then you can only do that once.
Mm.
So at first, I read that as the same round, but it's actually the same turn.
Mm.
So on that turn where you did flashback,
Flashback.
that you using one, I was using one, and if anyone else then got to use an ability because of what I did, that was
Uh-huh.
still happening on your turn. So I gained
Wow. Neat.
two drama. When a hero becomes winded for the first time, I gain 2, and that's again only once per combat,
Mm-hmm.
and that's generally going to happen in this game pretty quickly.
I
If
love the idea
someone,
that like like a lot of times the bard is like making notes of what happened, right, to sing a
yeah,
tale, and you're literally getting power from those things that would make for a good
right.
story.
Yeah, I kept asking, how does that make you feel? Are you winded? Um, so I gained 2 from that. If anyone within my line of effect rolls a 19 or a 20, and again, this is on 2d10, it did not happen once that I saw in our entire game. And there were quite a few rolls. I don't know if that was an outlier or if I know I rolled poorly because I rolled. Uh, so therefore, I didn't get any myself, but I gained 3 if anyone rolls a 19 or a 20, and
Wow.
that's not capped. That is anytime.
Anytime. Nice.
And if I or another hero dies, I gain 10.
Okay.
So that becomes, oh, that's a shame that Teos's character died. Oh, but I get 10 drama. Um,
Uh-huh.
so so that's how I gain my heroic resource. Uh, and I want to point this out. We didn't do it this way, but I want to point out that in the beginner adventure here, they have a character sheet that is 4 pages long. At least mine was 4 pages. The first page is just a picture. Okay, so let's set that aside. 3 pages long. The first page has all the stuff, and then it says first level, first encounter. So I was only looking at 1 page when we started because I thought, okay, it's only the first encounter. This is all I'm going to use. Then there's a second page that gives you abilities to add at the end of the second encounter, at the end of the third encounter, end of the fourth encounter, etc. So the character sheet does what we were talking about in our initial segment, which is have a structured approach and limit what's there at the start. So I didn't even really look at my second page early because I thought, well, I'll get a feel for my character in this first encounter. And then Tom said, no, we're using everything at first level. I was like, oh no. So I was like, during the first combat, trying to get a grip on what everything was.
Uh-huh.
And everything turned out to be quite a bit. So at first level, according to this character sheet, I had 4 possible main actions, not counting free strikes or the things that anyone can do. I had 1 maneuver and 1 triggered action that I didn't realize was a triggered action. So I didn't use it at first. And then once I realized what it was, it never came up that I could use it because the trigger never happened.
Mm.
I also had something that they call routines. So at the beginning of combat, before anyone gets to act, I get to choose a routine. And at first level, according to this character sheet, I could choose from one, two, three, four routines. One that gave everyone a +2 to their speed until the end of their turn. One that allowed people to use a recovery at the end of my turn if they were within 5 squares of me. One that when they started their action gained them a surge, which allows you to boost up the things that you do. And one was to do possibly a good amount of damage at the end of the round based on my roll. Lightning damage. Basically, lightning strikes an enemy I choose at the end of the round. So every round, before combat even started, I had to choose from those 4 things. Yeah,
Which is hard
it
when you
was a
don't
lot.
know. Yeah, when you don't know yet exactly how these work, what your
Yeah.
team is like, what the combat is like. Yeah, it's you just are randomly choosing one. Yeah.
And I used 3 of the 4. I never used the one that did lightning damage to a creature at the end of the round. I used the rest of them, though, to get a feel for what they each did. Uh, so that was at first level a lot
Yeah.
for me, who is fairly experienced player. So I'm wondering how that would translate to a brand new player who never played role playing games before
Sure.
versus a brand new player who was an experienced player of other role playing games.
Yeah, I share that concern. Though I had this concern about Daggerheart too, and people seem to be jumping into it pretty easily, but or reporting that they're having a blast. But to me, this feels like a lot, and I had to make a cheat sheet for myself the night before I opened up, and I just wrote myself notes of like, okay, for my main action, I have Kinetic Pulse, I have Awe, which costs Heroic 3, I have Kinetic Grip, I have Mind Spike. These are range, these are burst, these are, and then I have my free strikes, all that other stuff. And here are the typical other standard main things. Maneuver, I have flashback, I have remote assistance, and then here are the basic ones. When I move, what can I do? Act, advance, disengage, ride. Trigger, I have these 2 triggers, and then I had to note a condition that comes off of one of them where I can make myself bleed if I'm strained. Like I had to make these notes because otherwise, I think I would have just been like, "Oh, I use a random power," just because you can't process the character sheet,
Right.
which I think is a thing. Daggerheart has a really somehow they've done a good job with that character sheet, especially with that little sidebar thing that goes next to the
Mm-hmm.
character sheet and explains it, where it feels simpler than it is. And maybe because a lot gets pushed into power cards. And that might be a thing that if in this game, very clearly these could be cards, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so maybe it would be easier if I had these cards cut up instead of in a PDF and I grouped them, all my main actions in one place, my triggers, my maneuvers. That might make my turn easier, right? I'm going to choose one of these. I'm going to choose one of these. Hey, then my turn's done and I move, right? That would be easier. But you have to come up with a kind of strategy, which is a lot for a new player for sure, and a lot to teach if you're teaching people how to play the game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it reinforced to me, we had talked before about bringing fans into the hobby from outside the hobby versus inside the hobby. And what this tells me is that Draw Steel wants to draw from people inside the hobby. Um, they're not necessarily trying to teach brand new RPG players how to play. Can they? Absolutely. But is that like a main priority? Likely not. And whereas Daggerheart is trying to do a little bit more of that teaching, and Wizards of the Coast with this new box set is probably
For
trying to
sure.
bring in
Yeah. Yeah.
new folks.
Yeah. And I think
Uh,
Wizards is very smart to try to undo some of the, or let's say, uh, make it a benefit that the game is as complex as it is in 2024, which is arguably not arguably, it's more complex. Right, you have a feat, you have a few more things. Um, by then giving you essentially a play mat that you can put cards on top of, right? That makes it a little easier to grasp. Um, it might be worth thinking of something like that for this game. If I had been a consultant for Draw Steel and for Daggerheart, I would have said to both games, simplify level one.
Mhm.
Make it so you always first game you level out of level one, but start with an E. And I would have said that to 2024 as well. Just make
Mhm.
level one just it can't be too easy, right?
Right.
And what you tell is you tell the I think especially in fifth edition I would have said you just tell your hardcore start at level 3
Mhm.
because they want that kind of complexity and they understand it and grasp it. But it's hard to make that climb, right? I already feel like having played Saturday, okay, if I were playing this character again, I would be able to do it so much better, right? But that first game is a hill to climb. To learn it, to understand how the game works, and your character on top of that is a lot versus, if you're playing Shadow Dark, you got to learn the game, but your character has like two things, you know,
Mhm. Right.
beyond some things like armor class, it does like two tricks, right? So
Yeah.
it's really easy to learn. And that also frees up your brain to engage with the game itself, which can be very fun for new players, right? The
Right.
most fun I've ever had in running games with players are the clever things they do with what the game has in it rather than their character sheets. And so I do
Mhm.
worry with all three of 2024 Daggerheart, Draw Steel that the games are focusing you on your character capabilities, which is cool. And I think over time can have payoff because you get excited about your character, but it decreases that interaction with the game space because of that
Mhm.
complexity. The role
Cinematic.
playing, well, your powers are cinematic, but you're not thinking like, can I don't know, jump onto the caravan and then reach the embankment? Can I? You're let
Right.
because you have so many things you can already do, and there is no need for it, right? The more that your game is, I just swing my axe, then you're looking
Mhm.
for something else that will be better than that. But if the
Right.
game is, I swing my axe in a giant arc, hitting everybody within two of me, and all these other things, well, then positioning
Right.
matters only for those areas, not for like, yeah, yeah, you get it.
That's why for me, for me to have something be cinematic, I need to use my imagination.
Mm.
I need
Mhm.
to hear something or see something, sit back, close my eyes, and say, I'm envisioning this happening in a cinematic way.
Mhm.
And if I am so worried after I hear the description of the fire being set by the goblins, not to visualize the fire, but looking at my character sheet because there are 12 things that I could possibly do. And I want to pick not the best one, even, but
Mhm.
just the one that makes the most sense
Yeah.
to help the team out. Then I can't be cinematic. I can't get that part of the game into this thick skull.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that some of the default actions you take on your turn can be more of that. Like the
Mhm.
maneuvers, things like assisting somebody with what they're doing,
Mhm.
um, knocking someone back, grabbing someone. Those can
Mhm.
be a little more towards that type of play. Um, Also, in this kind of cinematic area, and it gets into a goal of the game is what the monsters were doing at level one. So
Mhm.
these were not pathetic creatures that had no threat at all.
Mhm.
The first fight, it was very clear that this was pushing in the narrative of the story, which was we are protecting the medicine in this caravan. And so the
Mhm.
very first fight are these rat folk bandits that are attacking your caravan in waves, trying to steal our medicines. And we would have a wave from the north and a wave from the east, and then one from the south, and then one from. So it kept us moving around the battlefield. And it was clear that we were being sort of enticed away from the caravan. I think
Mhm.
we were pretty good about seeing this, I think, anticipating this. We stayed pretty close to the caravan. We were able to push them away and defeat them as they came. They were often minions, which was fun, so the waves would die
Mhm.
pretty quickly. But it was hard to predict the fight. There was an obvious leader, but because of the priority on stopping these minions, we couldn't really focus on the leader too much. And I
Yeah.
think we had only one of the minions was able to grab a piece of medicine, and we were able to stop them before they could get away. So we did pretty well on that. This, yeah, we're gonna,
No, I agree. And the the thing you have to remember about this game as opposed to some other games is you will take damage,
yeah,
and you will take a lot of
it's true.
damage. Because like you with your rolls, even if you roll the lowest number possible, and I would know because I did it a lot, you are still doing some amount of damage to the monsters. So if they're a minion, there's a good chance that even if you only do 3 points of damage, the minion might only have 3 hit points or
Right.
4 hit points. Um, but it's the same for them attacking you. Even if they roll low, you're still taking 3 or 2 or 4.
Yeah.
And I had 21 hit points, or sorry, stamina, 21 stamina. So if I get hit by 5 minions that each do 3 points of damage at a low roll,
Yeah.
I'm already winded after the first foray of the first wave of minions.
Yeah.
Um,
I had
so you
18
need
hit
to be
points, and
yeah,
I was often dealing 4 to myself. So,
that could be bad.
uh-huh.
Well, that was the thing I felt is a lot of my powers were like a burst too, so I had to be in the middle of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was effective when I hit, but then I was in the middle of things.
Yeah, you took a lot of damage.
And so you and I took a great deal of damage, and thankfully we had DM David's sensor character
Mm-hmm.
who was giving us the ability to heal, but it was rough. And
Yeah, I
I
think,
want to talk
yeah.
about bouncing people around because I
Yeah,
think that
well,
was a huge
I mean, that takes us to the second fight, which was goblins. And this was not minions this time, but several
yeah.
lesser goblins. So they were pretty easy to knock off, but they weren't quite minions. And then a few more
Mhm.
stout ones and one leader. And listening to Matt Colville and others talk about the design of the game, one of the things it specifically aims to do as a game is to surprise players throughout the encounter. So if you think of
Mhm.
your typical D&D fight where on round 1 it sort of expressed itself. Like you know what this
Mhm.
this battle is, right? There's an ogre in a jail and there's a prisoner and whatever. But those
Mhm.
elements are the elements. We now know what they are. And halfway through you might say, what do we need to do? Deal more damage to the ogre and then the encounter will end. So the surprises are kind of gone, right? So Draw Steel
Mhm.
tries to say no, surprises are continuous and that you'll never feel like the battle has been won on round 1. And a great
Mhm.
example of this was I thought I was being really clever. There was a obvious goblin leader that was empowering the other goblins. So I took my hardest hitting ranged attack, focused on them, and boom, brought them down with a nice roll. And I felt like, yeah, we win. The next round, another goblin promoted themselves to being the new leader because this is a feature of the encounter where they can just go, I'm in charge. And suddenly they could get that. It took a little bit of time for them, but they could become the
Mhm.
leader and now give that benefit to the others. I thought that was great, right? It was quite the surprise. It kept the encounter fresh and delivered absolutely on those intentions of the game.
It's because the game master has as a resource something called malice. And that malice are points that the game master starts with, can accumulate and spend as the combat goes on.
Mhm.
And these malice abilities, like Teos said, not only give the game master a fun tactical element to play with, they can twist around the combat pretty quickly. So, as Teo said, what's the first thing that most D&D groups do? Kill the boss monster,
Right,
and then let's mop up the rest.
right.
Well, this was kill the boss monster. Oh, now we have a new boss monster, uh,
Yeah.
and so that you can tell MCDM, its developers, its designers latched onto this
Mhm.
with their fifth edition supplements, especially Flea Mortals, and
Yeah.
brought that into the game really, really well.
Yeah, and the malice mechanic fits into another of the big goals that Draw Steel had, which is that players should want to become DMs. And hearing Matt
Mhm.
Colville talk about this, I had this sort of aha moment where it really hit me that I recall a number of times I was running fourth edition. And as I was doing things with my monsters that were cool and exciting, a player said, "Hey, can I become a DM?" And I had never really thought about that. I honestly don't hear that a lot with 5th edition. Even though people are
Mhm.
having a great time, you could argue a better time, maybe.
Mhm. Mhm.
But people don't just say in reaction to things that I'm doing, I want to be DM. And if they do, it might be more around the idea of you get to tell the story, you got to write the adventure, something like that, right? But this Drasteel has said we want players to become DMs. And the mechanic of Malice is what does this. That you are doing these cool moves, these neat tactical things. You're shaping this in a tangible way that players will say,
Mhm.
wow, it is really cool to be the director. I want to try running a game. And I thought, playing this, I was like, yeah, I can see this. I can see this working.
Yeah, most definitely. It like I said, it scratches the itch of this tactical play that sometimes as the game master, you may feel like you don't get the same fun
Mm-hmm.
that the players are having. And this allows you to have that tactical fun and turn it into a narrative, cinematic,
Right.
dramatic, et cetera, element of play that scratches that itch plus.
Yeah.
So I would totally agree with that.
It's also neat because I mean I don't know enough about how Malice works yet. I'm just reading through the final version of the book and so on. But I would imagine in 4th edition, a lot of DMs were like, I'm not very good at tactics, and so my
Mhm.
players just win. But you could say to yourself, well, I'm going to give myself more Malice because I need that
Mhm.
boost, or I'm going to
Mhm.
devote Malice to triggering story things. You could do a lot with this as a
Mhm.
concept that is something that 4th edition did not have, D&D does not have, right? Now, Daggerheart
Mhm.
does sort of have this with fear, which is kind of neat. They're
Right.
not an exact parallel, but I think Malice goes a little harder in its intent and when what it's trying to do.
Mhm. We have more to talk about, but we have little time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think next time we will get into other parts of the adventure that we played,
Awesome.
including montages and negotiations. Teos, thank you for playing at a very, very early time on Saturday and sharing
5:30 in
your
the morning. I finished
knowledge.
My Daggerheart game at 12:30 at night, and or not Daggerheart. What am I playing? Deadlands. Deadlands finished at
Deadlands.
12:30 at night. At 5:30, I got up to play this game, and it was wonderful.
There you go. It was worth it all. And what's worth it all to me and to Teos are all our listeners out there. You are the reason that we keep going. You're the reason that we do this. So thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a supporter of Mastering Dungeons, you could go to our Patreon at patreon.com/masteringdnd. We have 3 different categories, including Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you for listening and for the support. Master of Realm supporters, you wonderful folks are in our show notes every week. And Masters of the Multiverse, you know what happens. Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiensen, Derek the Bearded GM, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Robo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdsronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, the John T. Mantis TTRPG podcast, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, Mighty Jerd, JL at Tileforge, JR of the Twilight Perspective, JT Evans, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Gal Cormandy. I hope I said it right because I was reached out to and I tried again. Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, the Mathemagician, Jaron from Mathis Arcanum, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vrenemir Prenner from Croatia, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo, Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Therese, Ryan Truk, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Wozniak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you all for your support. You can also help us out by subscribing to us on YouTube at youtube.com/@masteringdungeons, or give us a review wherever you listen to this show. Teos, where can people find you and your good works?
Find me at alphastream.org. With favorable winds at my back, I'm hoping I will actually have a new video out this week and maybe even a blog post. We'll find out.
Yay. You can find me on all the socials at Sean Merwin and find the podcast on all the socials at Mastering D&D. So we have drawn steel. We have answered questions. We have delivered the news. What are we going to do now?
I'm going to try out in my everyday workplace, my day job. I'm going to try that technique of the goblin and just see if I can, become the goblin leader.
Oh, nice. I'm just going to set everything on fire.